Hey guys, subscribe for daily content, and if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the QSP Rhino, a knife that I should have reviewed a long time ago and for some reason didn't. So thank you so much to QSP for providing me this knife for review. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. This knife is currently available in a few different configurations. All of them currently have the Timascus pocket clip and the Timascus backspacer. It actually took me a second to confirm that that was in fact Timascus and not just anodized, but it is. That's kind of a nice touch. It does have a price tag that reflects the way that you would assume. It is not an inexpensive knife, at least not in this current configuration. I am not sure. I actually looked for a bit to see if there was currently a base version of this knife available without the Timascus backspacer and Timascus clip, as you would assume that, you know, these would be upgrades, right? Or at least aesthetic upgrades. And to my knowledge, there is not. It's just whatever anodized color of titanium you want, and then it just comes with the Timascus clip and backspacer. So, like I said, those will be linked down below if you want to check them out. It does help my channel when you use those links before you buy something, but that's entirely up to you. Let's go ahead and measure this knife. Overall length of the QSP Rhino coming in at 7.5 inches. It really does feel like it's bigger than that, but that's the size it is. 3¼ inches of blade and just shy of 3¼ inches of cutting edge. How about some size comparisons up against the Ontario Rat Model 1 and the Ontario Rat Model 2? It's actually closer in length to the Ontario Rat Model 2, but it's got that full-size knife presence or height, thickness, etc. So it feels more like a knife the size of the Rat 1, if that makes sense. How about up against the Demco 80-20.5? Definitely similar in overall length. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3? Once again, closer to the size of the smaller one here, but it just feels larger. Keep saying the same thing. How about up against the Bug Out? And finally, where did it go? The Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue. It feels the most similar to the Ritter Hogue. It's just shorter. How's the action on this knife? So if you didn't know, QSP knives are made in China. They definitely have super high quality manufacturing though. So this is not the type of knife that you would see at a gas station for, you know, 20 bucks or something like that. We are talking about premium manufacturing. QSP knows how to do a good detent. They know how to, you know, create good pivot action, etc. The detent is properly tuned for the flipper tab, whether you want to push button it or light switch it. You can also use the fuller, which runs nearly the full length of the blade, and that means that wherever your preferred position is when you do that reverse flick, if you like to do that, it's going to work really well. It also has an okay front flipper, right? It's a little bit short, so finding the exact spot where it wants you to flip it is a little bit of a hassle, and you also need to make sure that the meat of this finger clears the flipper tab, which is kind of tricky to do. In some situations, it can kind of pinch you on the way around, but overall, the action is good. And I think, you know, the best part is that the access to the lock bar is plentiful, so you won't have any trouble disengaging it and returning it to the closed position so that you can flip it again, because we all know that, you know, the benefit of good action is really just to flip it over and over and over again and enjoy that said good action. No, but for real though, when you're using it, it is fairly easy to deploy and definitely easy to disengage. Let's go ahead and do carry profile. So thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's a little bit thicker, not too bad. Length and height up against the PM2 and the Para 3. You can see here the closed length is similar to the Para 3, and it is nearly as tall, including the flipper tab and the peak of the top of the blade here. Nowhere near as long as the PM2 though. For materials, we are looking at blasted titanium, in this case a satin finished M390 blade. It's important to note that this also comes in a compound configuration, so we just have sort of like a tanto edge here. It does have a compound tanto edge. I think there's a couple of different finishes. I know that there are different anodized options for the titanium, but the backspacer and clip, as far as I know, only come in Timascus. You can, if somebody finds that not to be the case, please let me know. It seems like there's a Gen 1 and Gen 2 of this knife, and Gen 1 may have had a standard version with just a tie clip and a tie backspacer. If they did away with that, I have no idea why. As far as right now, all I can find are the versions of this knife with Timascus clips and Timascus backspacers. I like Timascus, but I know not everybody does. it is factually a material that costs more to produce than just a plain titanium clip, right? I'm not sure if it has much more of an effect on the equipment that's used to machine the stuff, but they do add cost. So if it's not your preference, that's totally okay. But we can't ignore the fact that it does add cost to the knife. That's just one of those things, right? Okay, let's see. Let's do a hardware check. I'm going to get out my tools. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can check the driver's cot. You can find the this stuff right down in the description. Did I say they're inexpensive and recommended? Yeah, I did. You can find it right down in the section of my description. It talks about the tools I use on this channel or the pinned comment. I think all of this hardware is T8. That's what it looks like to me. So we're going to add the T8 bit here and check the pivot, which I'm almost certain is that way. Yes. The lock bar insert screw is T8. The body screws are T8. Yes. And the pocket clip screws are also T8. Minimal hardware, and it's all T8. I don't have a problem with that. This is a sandwich construction knife, titanium frame lock with bearings. Not too many parts, very easy to disassemble. As long as you have the right tools to do the job, you'll be good to go. There is some milling internally for weight reduction, which is nice. This knife feels like it weighs 4 1/4. A little more than 4 1/4, 4.44 ounces. Not bad. It's not a perfect ratio. And the balance of this knife, I would guess, is butt heavy. It is definitely. It's more towards the back end of this primary choil, but it's not too bad. So there we go. Blade stock thickness, I don't think it's going to stand up because of the rounded spacer there, or just that it's like a rounded texturing in the back spacer. Blade stock thickness is coming in at about 140 thousandths. So a little thicker than the average, but not ultra crazy thick or anything like that. All right, so we did weight, we did hardware check, we did thickness measurement there on the blade. I think it's time to move into the meat and potatoes here. So I don't know about you guys, but when I saw a picture of this knife, and especially when the knife is named something like Rhino, it just the picture makes it look like something that should be a lot bigger. And I know people say, like, well, you should have checked the specs first. That's true. You should always check the measurements. But if you can imagine, you know, from my perspective, it's not always, like, I have so many knives coming in. Sometimes I just look at the picture and I'm like, that looks interesting. And most of the time I can kind of guess the size of the thing. But it's obviously not a perfect process, you know, when you guess. So I'm sometimes wrong. And in this case, I was. It was a lot smaller than I thought. I kind of feel like the way this knife looks and the name suggests that it's going to be a bigger knife, especially when you look at that price tag. And while we can't, like, the size of the knife does not directly correspond with price. I mean, that's something that's really difficult for new people to understand, because in the most surface level knife world, that almost kind of works. Bigger knife equals bigger money. In like if it's like a very sectioned off portion of like the surface level knife world that you see, like, you know, if you go to the Walmart display case, a lot of times it's like bigger knife, bigger money, smaller knife, smaller money, right? And it's not perfectly the case, but it's generally kind of what you see. So new people get this idea that bigger knives are just worth more money. And then as you dig just slightly past the surface, it blows that completely apart, and you realize that the size of the thing doesn't really have anything to do with the price. Obviously, when we're talking about materials that are substantially more expensive than, you know, what you see in the Walmart knife display case, which is a lot of plastic, then increasing the overall size of the knife can have an impact on the overall price. But the overall, you know, the price tag really has more to do with, number one, country of origin. Number two, you know, the overall machining process, like how much was involved in the creation of the thing. Is it slapped together, or was time taken to make sure that all the tolerances were perfect and the edges were knocked down and all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted, etc. That definitely has more to do with the price. But it's still that part of my brain that's like, oh, big knife, big money. You know, it would have been a little bit easier to choke down that price tag if this thing was like 8 1/4, 8.5 inches is kind of what I thought. I thought it was going to be like a full inch bigger. It's not a small knife, right? But I am a little bit cramped in here. That's just my hand. I wear an XL glove. If your hands are bigger than mine, you will definitely feel squished in here. If your hands are smaller than mine, it might be a little bit more comfortable. As it is, I don't really like this ergonomic position. You can see my pinky just sort of lands on top of this area right here. So it's going to be ergonomically better or worse for, some people. And, I don't know. I like to assume the average person that's watching my channel probably has a hand size similar to mine. An XL glove size doesn't really mean anything, right? So I feel like a lot of people might be surprised at how not comfortable this is. It's not about the edges not being knocked down. I mean, they definitely are. It's just like had they just not done this back here, it would have been so much more comfortable because you're not squished into this little zone where your fingers are getting all cramped together to fit in there. If the handle were a little bit longer, right? I mean, if this were the exact same profile, but it was an 8.5-inch knife, so many more people would find it comfortable. So it's one of those things I can't really say the ergonomics are bad. I think they're just going to be not comfortable for a lot of people, if that makes sense. I do like that they did this little, I don't know what we call this. It's just a different type of machine. It's like sort of, they radius the spine and then they textured it diagonally, where it almost looks like braided rope or something like that. And it's nice. The same thing with the backspacer. So it's a nice little touch. I have to say that the entire knife feels like different, like pieces that went specifically to different designs and they just decided to slap it all on one knife. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. This handle, right, could go with a wide variety of different designs, and this blade could go with a wide variety of different designs, but they don't necessarily like complement each other perfectly. Certainly not with the addition of the spine texturing and the backspacer texturing. They're not bad. It just seems like a weird mix of things. It was kind of like a grab bag of stuff they threw all together. So the thing works, it functions. It's just the design doesn't seem to flow, and the design doesn't really seem to know what it is. It's not bad. I mean, a lot of that is really subjective. I mean, there's definitely people who are going to look at this and go, I actually like how it looks. But as somebody who's handled a lot of stuff, sometimes it's really obvious recognizing a certain flow with design. And then other times the flow just doesn't exist, or it just seems like an afterthought. And that's kind of what we're dealing with here. So again, I'm not coming down on the overall quality of execution of this knife. It's very, very good. It's QSP, obviously. They know how to make a knife. It's just a little bit weird. Cutting geometry is fine. I would call this about medium down behind the edge. The blade for, the blade itself looks good. It's a nice looking blade. You have a little bit of a tanto edge, so it should be noted that you'll be sharpening two separate edges. You'll have to change angles, which is for some people a bummer, and for other people it's not that big of a deal. I do not know how QSP is heat treating this blade. I would have to assume it's the same as other companies. They do that generic 59 to 61, which is, on the low end, it leaves a lot to be desired. But you could end up with one that's got a higher Rockwell hardness, and the geometry I think is reasonable. So for most people, I think this will perform all right. I do like the texturing. It feels good, and it extends all the way out here to where the nose drops in towards the tip, right? So that's nice. I mean, using this knife outside of the discomfort, or that's a stretch. It's just like an awkward, like my pinky is like, I don't have a spot, right? Using it, I think you'll be just fine, right? I mean, the edge geometry or the blade geometry is good, so it should perform all right. I feel like there was something else I was going to mention here. I always appreciate that QSP does their logo on the pivot. I find it completely unnecessary that they put their logo on the blade as well. Just leave this on there and you should be fine. M390 on the other side of the blade is also, I think, fine. I really wish that the titanium had something else going on. It's just a flat blasted piece of titanium, which sometimes will complement an intentional minimalist design, which I really don't like that term because it's an excuse sometimes for laziness. And then other times it actually works with the design, and then little tiny details are implemented to, sort of give it some character. In this case, this is just zero character, flat blasted titanium that doesn't complement any other part of the knife, and it's a little bit boring. It would have been nice to see a contoured titanium scale. It would have been nice to see some sort of inlay that complemented the backspacer and the pocket clip, since we apparently don't have any other options, right? A texture pattern, something else to give it a little bit more character, because this part of the knife just looks so much like so many other things out there that it's hard for me to absorb any part of this knife that is memorable, right? It just seems like, when you do something like this, people have so many other options. Like you're left asking, like, why choose this over the countless other options that are, in most cases, a lot less expensive. We have a lanyard hole here, so congratulations, lanyard people. You've got a lanyard hole there. No position for the pocket clip to be mounted for left-handed carry, which is a huge miss there. This is a symmetrical clip. Could have easily just milled another hole here and put another screw in there. It would have been just fine and not taken anything away from it. So I don't know why they didn't do that. The clip depth is fine, and the style of the clip is good, right? The edges are knocked down here, and it is a milled clip as thin as it is. It is absolutely milled. I just realized the clip is, I think it's actually slightly nested into the titanium. They didn't need to do that because they've got two screws right beside each other. So another screw hole here and not nesting it into the tie probably would have been the better way to go, at least for lefties. And righties, you wouldn't have noticed any difference other than having an additional screw right here, which I don't think is that big of a deal. The thing that I don't like about the clip is the ball bearing. I don't like these. They're pinchy. Some people love them. Some people hate them. I'm one of the people who doesn't like them, but it's another subjective thing, right? So it's kind of do what you will with that information. There is a steel lock bar insert that doubles as the over travel stop, so that's nice. The stop pin is internal and it is attached to the blade and runs on channels that are carved out of either side of the titanium. That's nice because you can maintain good centering and good action while having great solidity on lockout, which QSP has never had a problem with. So it probably would be fine with a single, traditionally placed stop pin, but this is fine as well. No blade play up, down, left, or right. No lock stick, no double clutch, no pivot lash. Very smooth and very consistent action. A nice medium detent that works with all the different deployment options. We do have, of course, have perfect centering with no detent lash. Really the biggest issue with this knife, outside of it just not having a memorable design and having some really weird combinations of things, and outside of the fact that I just wish the whole thing was bigger. I think that by itself, and not that bigger always means better. I think in the case of this knife, it would have added a little bit more character. It's just kind of an awkwardly sized knife for the design choices. The biggest issue here is the price at $358, which, when you're considering they've added, a reasonably substantial amount of Timascus, it's not that crazy. I feel like I would have been a little more comfortable seeing the price at about $315, $320, something like that. But why don't they have a version of this knife without Timascus at all for like $220, or something like that? You want to charge us an extra $100 for Timascus? I'd say that's par for the course. Do I think that's a reasonable, increase in price for those materials? I don't know. It's hard to say. That's generally what I see. Sometimes it's a little less. Sometimes it's substantially more, right? But it's weird that they don't, at least as far as I can tell, I cannot find any version of this knife that is currently available that has a backspacer and clip that is not Timascus. And again, there's a lot of indicators here that this is a version 2 of the knife or a Gen 2 of the knife, meaning they just, with this newer version, they just didn't do a base model, which is odd. There's not a lot here to make people want, unless if you look at this knife and you're like, I love that design, I love that look, it's going to fit my hand perfectly, it checks a lot of my specific boxes for an aesthetic. If that's the case, then go ahead, especially if you like Timascus, because you're really going to like this. Quality is there. Execution is there. It's got good action. It flips well, right? It's easy to manipulate. It's all that. If you're looking for a reason to buy this knife, if you're unconvinced on the design or you're not sure about the aesthetic and you're looking for a reason to buy this knife over other knives that are similarly priced, or realistically, a lot of knives that are substantially less money, I can't really give you one. There's not really a reason to pick this up. You have to just specifically be interested in this knife, right? So it's fine. It'll work. There's nothing wrong with its functionality outside of some ergonomic discomfort that will only be experienced by people with a similar hand size or larger, a similar hand size to mine or larger, right? Outside of that, it's fine. It's just, there's nothing special here to wrap it up after 19 minutes. So it's all right though. I'll link it down below. You guys can check it out if you want to. Please let me know if I'm incorrect about a base model being available. I could not find one and I searched for quite a while. And be sure, if you do find one, be sure that number one, it's actually available, and number two, that it is not a separate version or a version 1 of this knife. And then I think everybody would be happy to find that is that there's actually a less expensive one available, because it would make it a lot more justifiable, in my opinion. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.